My father stops paying my tuition after I fail a class and starts paying for my cousins, but I expose the affair with his brother's wife. I'm 18, a freshman in college, and it's been much harder than I expected. Moving away from home, balancing classes, and trying to figure it all out has been overwhelming. I couldn't catch up, despite my best efforts. I failed one of my classes at the end of the semester. I was so scared. Failing felt like the worst thing that could happen. But what made it worse was telling my dad, Drake, 46. I thought he'd be upset, of course, but I also thought he'd give me a chance to explain myself. I was wrong. When I told my dad I failed a class, he exploded. He accused me of wasting his money, saying I wasn't taking college seriously and needed to learn a lesson. Her anger completely surprised me because I'd always been a good student. I'd gotten perfect grades in high school, worked hard, and always tried my best. This was the first time I'd struggled academically, and it was a huge blow to me as well. I told him it was just one class, and he could easily make it up, but he wouldn't listen. He said this mistake proved I no longer deserved his support. Then he gave me the worst news possible. He wouldn't pay my tuition anymore. I had always worked hard to make him proud. And now, after just one failure, he was turning his back on me. All my efforts seemed to have been in vain. I felt like he was abandoning me when I needed him most. And suddenly, I was alone. My mother, Sophia, who was 45, tried to convince him to change his mind, but he refused. He told me I should grow up and face the consequences of my actions. He didn't seem to care. For weeks, I struggled with what to do. I looked into student loans and part-time jobs, but I felt completely lost. If it was already difficult with my dad paying for tuition, it was even more difficult now. Then I discovered something that made everything even worse. My cousin, David, 19, my dad's nephew, started college last year. I knew my dad had been paying his tuition because my dad used to say that my uncle Frank, 48, had done so much for him when he was young, and he wanted to return the favor by taking on this responsibility. I always thought it was just a little help here and there, like covering some books or helping with the rent. But no, my dad was paying for everything: tuition, books, housing, everything. Here I was, struggling to figure out how to get through college, and my dad was doing it all for someone else. When I told him about it because it seemed unfair, he told me David deserved it because he was getting good grades, unlike me. He even said, "Why should I reward failure?" That devastated me because he didn't even try to hide the fact that he cared more for David than me. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about how much he'd hurt me. I felt abandoned and betrayed. That's when I remembered something I'd been ignoring for years. Growing up, my dad's relationship with my Uncle Frank's 46-year-old wife, Kim, always seemed a little odd to me. They were very close, closer than I thought they should be. At family gatherings, they always found reasons to talk alone or step outside for private conversations. They shared inside jokes and laughed in a way that made it seem like they were the only ones in the room. When I was a kid, I didn't think much of it, but it always struck me as odd. Later, I learned they weren't just close by chance. My dad and Kim grew up together in the same neighborhood. Their families were close, so they spent a lot of time together as children. My mother dismissed it as nothing, saying they had always been good friends, but their relationship always seemed to run deeper than a childhood friendship. I later found out they had dated briefly as teenagers. My mom mentioned it casually one day, as if it were nothing to worry about. She said they were just friends, and it didn't mean anything. It was just a very casual thing. But as I grew older, I noticed her behavior and couldn't help thinking maybe there was more to it. Even after Kim married my Uncle Frank, she and my dad remained very close, too close. The way they talked, the way they laughed, even the way they looked at each other, it felt like there was a history they hadn't outgrown. My dad always seemed to stand up for Kim, even when it didn't make sense, and she always seemed to seek him out, no matter who else was around. Now, looking back, it's hard not to think the signs were always there. Their connection wasn't just about being old friends. It was something more. To my mother, it might have been nothing, but to me, with this favoritism from my cousin, not so much. After what my dad did to me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided to find out the truth. I checked his emails and texts. Luckily, my father doesn't care much about the security of those things. He's often asked me to help him with them, so I had his passwords. At first, I felt guilty for snooping, but then I thought, why should I care about his privacy when he couldn't care less about me? It didn't take long for me to find what I was looking for. My dad and Kim had been having an affair for years. It wasn't just a fling. There were text messages, emails, and even photos that proved it was a full-blown relationship. But then I found something even worse. David wasn't my Uncle Frank's son, but my dad's. His texts made that clear. My dad and Kim had been hiding the truth for years. They talked about how guilty Kim felt for lying to my Uncle Frank and how my dad always saw David as his real son. It also explained why my dad paid for David's college. He felt as responsible as his father. Suddenly, everything made sense. My dad's favoritism toward David wasn't just about being a good uncle. David was his son, the son he had with the woman he truly loved. Meanwhile, I was the daughter he didn't care about and who tied him to this marriage with my mom. His affair didn't just betray his marriage to my mom or his relationship with my Uncle Frank, it had shaped my entire life. Because all this time he treated me differently. Every time my dad acted like he was this perfect moral guy, it was a joke. He wasn't just a bad dad, he was a liar and a hypocrite. At first, I didn't know what to do. Should I tell my mom? Should I confront him? I knew I wasn't going to protect him. First, because he was a cheater, and second, because my mother didn't deserve to live without knowing this. But I didn't know where to start, because it wasn't just my father being unfaithful. This was going to have repercussions for the entire family. I decided to tell my Uncle Frank. I sent him all the evidence I had and had been able to gather over the past few days. I also sent it to him with an explanation of what it was, because otherwise, he wouldn't understand what was going on, because I sent so much. When my Uncle Frank called me after reading it, he was devastated. He thanked me for telling him, but said he didn't know how he was going to move forward with this. The situation exploded after everything was revealed. My Uncle Frank wasted no time confronting my dad and Kim, showing them the evidence I had sent. Kim tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was right there in front of them. My dad didn't even bother denying it. There was no point in doing so. My Uncle Frank was furious. He kicked Kim out of the house the same day, refusing to let her stay even a single night. She begged and cried for his forgiveness, but that was never going to happen. Within a week, he filed for divorce, citing infidelity and making it clear he no longer wanted to be with her. It didn't end there. My dad and my Uncle Frank used to own a business together. After the affair broke, my Uncle Frank bought out my dad. Without that income, my dad's finances collapsed. He had been living far beyond his means for years, and now he couldn't keep up. He had to sell our family home and move into his parents' house. As for David, my dad could no longer afford his tuition. David had to drop out of college and move back in with my Uncle Frank, who was also struggling after his divorce. David didn't know any of this, so he preferred the father he'd had his entire life, not his biological one. I also told my mother, and although she took a little longer to file for divorce, she did it too. She kept half of the marital assets, except for the house, which belonged to my father. Now my father is broke, isolated from all his family and friends, and has nowhere to turn. He's tried to contact me several times, but I haven't responded. I haven't felt any compassion for him. I don't think he deserves it after everything he's done. He lived a double life, and that doesn't go very far. That said, I do feel some guilt for David. He didn't do anything wrong, and now his life has completely fallen apart. Part of me wonders if I went too far. Maybe exposing the affair wasn't the right thing to do. So, I'm the bad guy for exposing my dad's affair and ruining his life after he chose my cousin over me. Update 1. I'd like to tell you a little more about my mother, because I think I've told you very little about her. Just a summary. My mother has been struggling ever since she found out about my dad's affair. She had no idea anything was wrong, although I think the signs were there. They had been married for over 20 years, and she thought everything was perfect. I trusted him with everything. So when I showed her everything I found, she was devastated. I'd never seen her so hurt. I didn't want to be the one to tell her, but I also wasn't going to keep her in the dark about this. I thought about how it would destroy her, but at the same time, the truth is necessary. When I finally showed my mom the evidence, she just stayed silent and said absolutely nothing. It was like I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I don't think I expected this from my dad, especially not with someone like Kim. Kim had always been my mom's close friend. They'd known each other for years. My mom never suspected anything. To her, Kim was just a friend, and she never thought my dad would do this to her. She left home as soon as she could. She couldn't stay there, not with my dad, not after everything she'd been through. She moved into her parents' house. I could see her like that. Everything got worse from then on. My mom was devastated. She couldn't eat or sleep. It was horrible watching her fall apart. She was bedridden for several days, barely speaking to anyone. My grandfather offered to help me with my tuition, which was a relief. I felt guilty about it because I didn't want to add more stress to everything my mom was already going through. However, She didn't want me to drop out of school, and I knew I had to keep going, even if it felt impossible. She told me that with so many bad things coming out of this, I couldn't add to the stress of dropping out of school. Over time, my mom started talking to me more about what had happened. She told me about my dad and Kim's past, and how they had dated when they were young, but broke up because they didn't want anything serious. After that, my dad met my mom, and they started dating. Meanwhile, Kim started dating my Uncle Frank. My Uncle Frank made sure my dad completely forgot about Kim, and that my dad was okay with them dating. It all seemed so simple at first, but now it just seemed like a big lie. My mom never thought anything of it. She never suspected my dad still had feelings for Kim. He'd always been the kind of man who seemed completely devoted to her. My mom never thought Kim would do something like this. She always considered her a close friend, a member of the family. And finding out Kim had an affair with my dad devastated her. Not only was I angry at my dad, I was also upset at Kim. They had both broken her trust. And I think that's what hurt her the most. For her, it wasn't just a romance, but a years-long betrayal by people she considered family. I tried to comfort my mom as best I could, but it was difficult. I'd never seen her like this before, and I felt helpless. My mother couldn't find the energy to do much of anything. I could see she struggled even to look at herself. And then, there's the guilt. I'm going back to college next month, and I'm scared to leave her behind. She's not okay, and I feel like I should stay with her, helping her get through this. But I know I can't stop my life, and she's told me I have to go back to college. It's hard though. Every time I think about leaving, I feel a knot in my stomach. My mom won't tell me she wants me to stay, but I know she's hurting, and I don't want to leave her alone. The one I don't feel bad for is my father. He's also suffering through all of this, but I wouldn't stay here for him. I feel guilty for revealing the infidelity, but at the same time, I know it wasn't my fault. There's someone to blame here, and it's my father, but I still resent being the messenger. My uncle is still trying to put his life back together, trying to find some normalcy with my cousin. But all of this is being quite hard on everyone. My uncle told me he can't send my cousin to college right now. He's going through a divorce, he had to buy out my father, and there are a lot of expenses. He still loves his son because he's raised him all this time, but it's hard for him. At least I feel more at ease that my uncle doesn't hate me right now, and he's even thanked me for showing him the evidence. Just thinking about staying married to that woman makes him furious. Update 2. My mom called me yesterday, and she sounded tired. She told me Kim had been contacting her for weeks, but she hadn't responded. At first, Mom said she didn't see the point. Why talk to the woman who ruined her marriage? But Kim kept insisting, saying she needed to see her, and finally Mom agreed. She wasn't interested in hearing an apology. She just wanted to know the details. Still, the first thing Kim did was immediately start apologizing. She said all the things you'd expect, how sorry she was, that she didn't mean to hurt him, that she shouldn't have done it. Mom didn't care. She stopped Kim and told her she didn't want to hear any excuses or apologies. She wanted to know what had happened, everything from the beginning. Kim hesitated, but my mother had agreed to the meeting to learn these things, and it was the only reason I wasn't jumping on her head right now. If Kim wanted to get out of there with her head intact, she had to be honest. It started years ago, before my parents were even married. For a while, things were normal. Dad and Kim were just friends, and Mom became close to Kim as well. But then, one night at a party they all threw together, it all started. Everyone had been drinking a lot, and at the end of the night, Mom and my Uncle Frank went to sleep. But Dad and Kim stayed up talking. At some point, Dad told Kim he still had feelings for her, and to his surprise, or maybe not so much, Kim said she felt the same. And they ended up sleeping together that night. The next day, Dad and Kim promised each other that what they did was a mistake, and that it would never happen again. They both felt guilty, but that wasn't the end of it. They continued seeing each other secretly, finding ways to spend time together whenever they could. Neither of them wanted to leave their partners. They said they didn't want to ruin what they had with their partners, but in reality, they just didn't want to face the consequences. They believed they could hide their affair while maintaining their relationships. After a few months, my Uncle Frank proposed to Kim. Dad assumed Kim would say no. He believed she loved him, and would reject my Uncle Frank so they could be together. But she didn't. She said yes. Dad was shocked and furious. He felt as if she had chosen him, even though they had been secretly together for months. He had hoped she would leave my Uncle Frank for him, but instead, she agreed to marry him. Out of anger and frustration, Dad decided to propose to Mom. It wasn't because he was ready or deeply in love. It was because he didn't want to feel left behind. Mom had no idea. She was happy and excited when he asked her to marry her, and she accepted immediately. The two couples were married within 2 months, and to everyone around them, everything seemed perfect. Two happy couples starting their lives together. But it was all fake. After the wedding, Dad and Kim decided to end their affair. They told themselves they could just be friends. But on Christmas Eve, shortly after they were married, the family gathered at my grandparents' house, and everyone stayed there for Christmas. That night, Dad and Kim ended up alone again. They started reminiscing, talking about their old days together. One thing led to another, and they ended up sleeping together again. And this time, Kim got pregnant. Kim told Dad the baby was his, but he didn't want my Uncle Frank to know. They decided to keep it a secret and carry on as if nothing had happened. My Uncle Frank believed David was his son and raised him as such. Meanwhile, Dad and Kim continued their affair in secret. By the time I was born, their relationship had already been going on for over a year. Kim told Mom all this. She admitted that over the years, there were times when she and Dad tried to stop, but they always came back to each other. Their affair lasted for years, until I exposed them. Kim also told Mom what happened after everything came to light. When my Uncle Frank discovered David wasn't his biological son, he was devastated. But despite everything, he decided to continue raising David as his own. He said biology didn't matter, and that he still loved him like a son. David still lives with my Uncle Frank, and my Uncle Frank will pay his college tuition. According to Kim, David is back in college now, and my Uncle Frank has taken full responsibility for him. Kim apologized again after telling Mom all this. She said she felt horrible about everything and wished she could take it back. But Mom didn't care about her apologies. She told Kim that nothing could undo the damage they'd caused. Then Mom got up and left. When Mom called me and told me everything Kim had said, I was devastated. It was all bad enough without the pain of learning the details. But at the same time, she said it was a relief to finally know the truth. Update 3. I came home for Thanksgiving, and it felt different, in a positive way. The house was full of people, Mom's friends, my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, and cousins. Everyone was in good spirits, having a great time, and it seemed like everything that had happened had finally lightened up, at least for a moment. The best part was seeing Mom. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. She wasn't as quiet or sad as before. Instead, she was happy and talking to everyone. She even cracked a few jokes, something I hadn't seen her do in a long time. It was a huge relief to see her feeling better. Being away made my stomach knot up every time I thought about her, which was quite often. After everything she'd been through, she feared she'd never be able to move on from what she felt. But here she was, surrounded by people who loved her, and it seemed she was finally finding her way back. The day passed without a hitch. No one mentioned the mess with Dad or what had happened in our family. It's a taboo subject. At least it felt good, because it seemed like I had a family again. Later that night, after dinner was over and most people were just hanging out, the doorbell rang. We weren't expecting anyone, but I was the one who got up to answer the door, and when I opened it, I froze. It was Dad, who looked awful. At least compared to the last time I saw him, which was months ago. He said he wanted to talk to me. At first, I told him it wasn't a good time. I didn't want Mom to know he was there. She'd been so nice, and I couldn't risk her seeing it and ruining the day because she was a selfish person who needed to talk to me. But she was insistent, and I didn't want them to see it. So I told her, okay, we can talk, but not inside. I told Mom it was one of my neighborhood friends, and that I was going for a walk with them. She didn't ask any questions, and just told me to put on a jacket because it was cold. Our neighborhood is pretty safe, so she didn't seem worried. I went out and took Dad to a small park. He wanted to seem genuinely concerned about me, asking how I was and how college was going. I told him everything was fine, that I was doing well. He said he was now working at a local restaurant, that the pay wasn't very high, but it was enough. Then he asked about Mom. I told him I wasn't going to talk to him about her. I couldn't believe he'd had the nerve to ask about her after everything he'd done. I felt so angry, and I had a kind of outburst. I told him how much I loved him, how I trusted him above all else, and how he'd broken that trust in the worst possible way. She'd done everything for him, stood by him through thick and thin, and he'd spent years betraying her. She believed in him, and he rewarded her with all his things. And now he had the nerve to ask about her, to even pretend he cared. Dad just stood there, letting me vent. He didn't interrupt or try to defend himself. And when I finally shut up, He said he knew he'd ruined everything. He said he destroyed everything. And he didn't blame Mom or me for not wanting anything to do with him. He admitted he'd lost everything: his wife, his family, even the respect of his parents and siblings. He told me that before all this, he had a family that loved him. Now I had no one. He said I didn't deserve forgiveness, but he hoped he could rebuild something with me. He said he didn't want to lose me too. The only reason he was there asking to talk was because he didn't have anyone else, and that day was particularly hard because he felt alone. I told him I wasn't going to be his last option, that I wasn't going to be there for him now that he had no one. He said he understood, but that I should know he'd be there for me if I ever needed him for anything. He gave me his new number and apologized again. Then I got up and went back to the house, and he stayed sitting on that bench. When I got home, I didn't tell Mom what had happened. She was still downstairs, laughing and chatting with her sisters. She looked so happy, and I didn't want to ruin it for her. Instead, I went up to my room and lay down. Update 4. Some of you have been asking what happened to my Aunt Kim, and I don't have any answers for you. I know she went to her parents' house, but I haven't heard much from her. My uncle doesn't want to talk about her, which I respect, and the only person who could have contact with her would be my cousin, but he hasn't wanted to have any contact with me. I felt bad about that because until now I felt guilty for having ruined her life. Mine wasn't much better, but he was the one who had had a father who wasn't her biological father all this time. Well, that was until now. My uncle still held out hope that he was his biological son. As for my aunt, she was certain he was my father, but there was never a single message or email mentioning a paternity test. So, my uncle suggested my cousin take one, at least to avoid living with the doubt. But they never gave him that test, because after my cousin gave many excuses to do it, he finally confessed that he'd already taken one with my father. And you know what's worse? He only agreed to have a relationship with my uncle so he could pay for his college. I knew my father couldn't afford it with everything he was going through. And instead, he made my uncle, who wasn't doing well financially, make an effort to pay it off. All while knowing, for at least 5 years, that he wasn't my uncle's son. Now he's had to drop out of college because he can't get a part-time job like I did, and seek financial assistance. It's true that my grandfather is helping me, but I've tried to make the financial burden less of a burden on him. My uncle has also offered to help me at this time, but I've thanked him and said no because I'm fine. It may take me a little longer, but I'm working hard at this. What's costing me a lot of effort is understanding my father, my aunt, and my cousin. It's as if there's something in their DNA that makes them bad people. They've all lied, cheated, and hidden things. The only consolations I have are that my father, at his age, is in a low-paying job, that my aunt is living with her parents, isolated from much of the family, and that my cousin has ruined his future. They deserve what they get.